In this week's news, Easter celebrations around the world. Christians call for more compassion on religious minorities in the Middle East. And an historic vision comes to life.
This is InFocus Christian News and Current Affairs.
Hello, thanks so much for joining us this week. I'm Kent Kingston and my colleague at the news desk is Sibel Coutet. How are you, Sibel?
Good, thanks, Kent. And you?
Yeah, quite well. How was your Easter weekend?
It was really good. I had lots of fun with the kids. What about you?
Yeah, it was great. But Easter, I don't know, Latin Easter, Orthodox Easter, Passover, look, those dates, I'm not really too tied up any particular weekend, but I think any time is a great time to reflect on Jesus' death and resurrection.
I completely agree.
Anyway, we've got a great show lined up for you today. Lyle Shelton will join me from Canberra to offer some insights into Australia's political scene. Sue Radd is in the studio to talk about dates. Turns out there's a lot of goodness packed into those little goodies. So yeah, that'll be great. Plus, I'll be sitting down with singer-songwriter Nicholas Zork, who'll be discussing the importance of using creativity in worship.
It sounds like we've got a big lineup today, Kent.
We do, Sibel, and it all begins with the news.
Thanks, Kent. Easter Monday saw a colourful celebration in Sydney's streets under the theme Choose Hope Sydney. Hundreds of people joined in the Sydney Easter Parade, as well as the Free Family Day activities at Hyde Park. Organisers say Sydney's been through some tough times, and Easter is the season for reconnecting with hope. A range of human rights, legal and faith groups say Australians need clarity on the right balance between freedom of religion and anti-discrimination law. According to the Australian newspaper, Human Rights Commissioner Tim Wilson has expressed disappointment that the High Court has refused to review a controversial Victorian court decision on the issue. The Victorian Court of Appeal ruled last year that a Christian youth camp had acted unlawfully when it prevented a same-sex attracted group from using its facilities. Some legal experts say that religious freedom is not a very fashionable human right these days and is in danger of being lost in the mishmash of conflicting anti-discrimination laws. New figures show that due to ongoing violence in Syria and Iraq, the number of people seeking asylum is now at its highest level since the Balkans conflict in 1992. Australian federal MPs from both major parties say it's time to consider a similar strategy to what was done in 1999 to help the people of Kosovo, that is, to provide a safe haven in Australia during the conflict, on the understanding that most refugees would return home once it was safe to do so. The Australian Christian lobby has urged the Abbott government to support the plan, saying that Christians, Yazidis and Shia Muslims in Syria and Iraq are being targeted because of their religion. The influence of ISIS has reached other militant groups around the world, with a number of them swearing allegiance to the so-called Islamic State. One such group is Nigeria's Boko Haram, which rose to international prominence last year when it kidnapped 232 mostly Christian schoolgirls. A year after the kidnappings, the majority of the schoolgirls are still being kept as prisoners. World Watch Monitor has received reports of regular rapes, severe punishments, and even the deaths of some of the girls who refused to renounce their Christian faith. It's believed a number of babies have now been born to the girls. It's been more than 50 years since Martin Luther King Jr. observed that Sunday morning was the most racially segregated hour of the week, and it seems American Christians are still struggling with the same issue. A key leader of the traditionally white Southern Baptist Convention told a church conference it was blasphemy to continue meeting in segregated churches, a denial of the power of the resurrected Christ to reconcile. Meanwhile, a coalition of 34,000 African American churches has broken official ties with the Presbyterian Church over its support of same-sex marriage. and the Seventh-day Adventist Church in North America has affirmed its ongoing commitment to parallel administration structures for Black and other churches, saying the current arrangements work well for reaching diverse populations and urban centres. Research from around the world is coming to similar conclusions. Yes, it's tough to be unemployed, but having a strong faith can ease the strain. According to the Huffington Post, separate studies of thousands of people in Germany, Poland and the USA found that strong spiritual commitments tended to leave unemployed people less depressed and more satisfied with their lives. The reason may be the social support provided by a religious community, as well as the positive belief of a divine being who cares and has a plan for the future. It's anticipated that a number of controversial issues will be discussed by Adventist leaders and delegates during the 5-yearly General Conference session meetings in July. But church leaders are doing what they can to set the right tone. 100 days of prayer have been declared ahead of the session, calling for the power of the Holy Spirit to lead proceedings. And a successful search for bearded Adventists has resulted in the reenactment of the 1903 vision seen by church co-founder Ellen White that focused on the need for reconciling differences and confessing sins.
We as leaders have let God down. We must humble ourselves. We must become living examples of what a leader could be when Jesus is in his heart. How can we beg God to shake away this Laodicean slumber?
Despite the closure or reinvention of Christian music festivals around Australia and New Zealand, it seems Easterfest in Toowoomba, Queensland is still going strong.
Hey, you can't count us out. We've been running up against the crowd. Yeah, we're the dark horses. We're singing, wait, it's not over now.
US rockers Switchfoot headlined the festival once again, with music from a variety of genres also represented by more than 100 other artists. But the organisers of Australia's largest ticketed alcohol and drug-free event are keen to deliver more than music. Easterfest featured inspirational speakers and activities for both young and old.
He is lifted high forever. He is risen. He is alive.
And that's this week's news. Kent?
Thanks, Sibel. We'll be right back with the Australian Christian Lobby's Lyle Shelton.
Travel back in time to ancient civilizations through this bi-monthly magazine, Archaeological Diggings. This month, Diggings looks at the Shroud of Turin, one of the most studied artefacts in history. But is it really Jesus as claimed? We explore how ancient Egyptians not just adored, but literally worshipped their pets. And we also bring you the latest news from the fascinating world of archaeology. Don't miss an issue. Subscribe online or ask for Archaeological Diggings at your local newsagent.
Time for Politics in Focus now. And joining us from Canberra is the Managing Director of the Australian Christian Lobby, Lyle Shelton. Thanks for being with us, Lyle.
Always good to be with you, Kent.
Now, Lyle, in our news bulletin earlier, we heard that a number of federal politicians from the two major parties are calling for Australia to be a temporary safe haven for people escaping conflicts in Syria and Iraq. Do you think this proposal's likely to get up?
I certainly hope so, Kent. I think this is a great initiative by Philip Ruddock from the Liberal Party and Chris Hayes from the Labor Party. Both of these parliamentarians went to the Middle East late last year and visited firsthand some of the refugee camps, talked to some of the leaders of the Christian churches that are being persecuted by the militant Islamist movement, Islamic State. And they've seen the crisis firsthand on the ground, where there's 2 million people in Lebanon that have crossed the border. That country's at breaking point. And here we are in Australia, perhaps not really pulling our weight in terms of helping with this humanitarian crisis. And there is a precedent in the past where we helped people from the Kosovo crisis in the late 90s, where we provided 5,000 temporary protection places for them. And most of them went back when it was safe. And Philip Ruddock and Chris Hayes are suggesting it's time for us to do something like this again, and I agree.
Is there any indication that, say, Tony Abbott or the current Immigration and Border Protection Minister is on board with this?
No, there isn't, sadly, and we're very keen at ACL to do what we can to support this. We've been calling for a doubling of the humanitarian intake for some time, and those calls have fallen on deaf ears. We'll continue lobbying up in the Parliament, and we'll continue supporting Mr Ruddock and Mr Hayes to try and get some change, because a nation as wealthy as Australia really should be doing much more in the face of this global humanitarian crisis.
Okay. On to another topic, Lyle. I understand that there are moves there in the ACT to set up exclusion zones in public spaces that prevent any kind of protest or even prayer. Have I got that right?
Yeah, this is a really perplexing one, Kent. Now it's a sensitive issue. There were some Catholic people who regularly meet to pray on public land outside an abortion clinic here in Canberra. And they were joined recently by the Catholic Archbishop of Canberra, Christopher Prowse, in the lead up to Easter as part of a prayer vigil in support of human life. Now, that wasn't something the Greens here in the ACT appreciated, and they want to try and ban this sort of peaceful prayer vigils outside these sort of clinics. Now, it's a bit ironic because, you know, the Greens, they're not against actual illegal civil disobedience in support of their causes, and yet a prayer meeting is a threat to them about something which goes against their ideology. So double standards here by the Greens.
Do you think they're maybe particularly worried about, you know, vulnerable people that may be using that service that maybe just don't need that kind of pressure at that particular time?
Look, I think that's a valid concern, but it is a very vexed issue. It's an issue of public policy, and I think people should have the right to very peaceful and respectful protest. And of course, this is a prayer vigil, and I think surely in a free society where we believe in freedom of association, that should be allowed. I mean, if the Greens can go into the CSIRO with whippersnippers and chop up test crops that are genetically modified, surely we can have a prayer vigil for something that many people feel very passionately about.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how that one works out. Thanks so much for your insights, Lyle.
Pleasure, Kent. Thanks for having us.
And now, you may be surprised to know James Toogood has apparently got himself a date.
Now, this is a date. Just lip-smacking goodness that's been around since ancient biblical times. In fact, you just can't sit here and not just taste it. But this is why, while I'm munching and crunching, we have Sue Radd with us to tell us why you should be eating dates. Sue, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good time for a date?
But tell us about dates, because it's just fantastic food. I love them. I snack on them.
Dates are absolutely amazing because apart from just being a sugary food, they have lots going for them nutritionally and in terms of your health.
Okay.
So to just give you a few examples, they are packed with fibre, but not just one type of fibre, two types of fibre, the type that actually lowers your cholesterol and the type that helps you become more regular.
Okay.
So dates are really good if you have a high cholesterol. Secondly, they're actually really rich in potassium. And this is something that's really important to help with our blood pressure. And what many people don't realise is that by weight, they actually contain more potassium than even bananas.
Oh, so if you're feeling a little bit tense, folks, just reach for a date.
Or if you've just gone for a run and just want to up your potassium, have a date too.
Okay.
The other thing is, compared to some other sugary foods, they actually have a low to intermediate glycemic index. And that just means that they release sugar into your bloodstream a lot more slowly than those quick-acting sugary foods.
It just sounds crazy, really, because they just taste so sweet, don't they? These beautiful natural dates.
Yep, and so therefore they're good for everyone, even people who have pre-diabetes or diabetes. You can actually include some dates to help sweeten your food. And the thing I love about them, James, mostly is that they're so versatile. You can use them in so many ways, particularly as a substitute for sugar. You know, for weight, if you substitute dates for sugar, you get the same intensity of sweetness, but you also get at least 16 different types of nutrients. and phytonutrients.
Well, you always surprise me, Sue, every single time. Of course, I know you can have dates for dessert, sticky date pudding, etc., but
Yes.
breakfast and even savoury? Show us.
Yes. So, for example, you could always just slice up some dry dates. And by the way, there's various types of dates, but generally speaking, you can buy them dry or fresh. So dried ones you can just slice up and mix through porridge. I actually like to make... Yeah, it is dry porridge at the moment. I actually like to make sticky date porridge. And when I make that, I actually use oat bran, which is very high in water-soluble fibre, and dates, which are also high in water-soluble fibre, and they both help to strip your cholesterol. And if you want a recipe of that, you can download a free recipe from my website.
SueRadd.com.
For that. Yes. So breakfast, that's one way. You could obviously have them from snacks. You could just have them plain, like a fresh date there. Or what they love to do in the Middle East is to slip the dates open, remove the seed, and stuff them with different types of nuts and seeds.
Walnut?
Go for it. And they're beautiful. So if someone comes over for a cuppa and you want to serve them just a little something delectable, rather than pulling out the biscuit, give them a date.
And it's so easy and it's so quick.
Absolutely, and delicious to boot. Or you can make little balls from dates, such as those little balls there.
Now, this is really spectacular. This is heading towards... Folks, you're not going to believe it. We're almost out of time. But tell us about caramel.
Well, you can
know
make
how to turn
a
this into
beautiful date caramel sauce. You just soak some dry dates in some hot water, and then you blend them up in a food processor. And add a squeeze of lemon juice just to help preserve them. And it's the most delicious caramel sauce that's totally natural.
Are you going to put that recipe up on your site?
We will. And the other thing is, don't forget to use them in your savoury dishes as well. For example, dates are perfect in Moroccan tagine dishes. So, they're perfect for breakfast, perfect for snacks, they're great for savoury things, but also for sweets. So a lot of people use them with nuts and seeds for the bases of, say, cheesecakes, or to make all kinds of raw food desserts. They're amazing. They're versatile, and they're just the best replacement for sugar because they're packed with nutrients as well as lovely sweetness to fix any sweet tooth.
Well, I do have a sweet tooth. I just love sugary food, and to think that dates, I always thought they were bad for you because they're so sweet. Not at all. I'm nuts about dates. Nuts about dates. This one's going in.
Enjoy.
Thank you, Sue.
The media targets our goals with destructive messages. But is there an alternative? Yes, it's Gigi. Gigi is a great new magazine for teenage girls that uplifts good Christian values. Finally, a way to pass on our values in a way the teenage girls in our life will love. So give a subscription to a teenage girl you love today. Visit ggmagazine.com.au. That's gigimagazine.com.au.
Hi, welcome back. Well, how does your church go with worship? It's certainly been an area of conflict in a lot of churches, but also, I guess, a source of great comfort and great inspiration. And here to talk to us about worship this morning is Nicholas Zork. How are you, Nick?
Good.
So Zork, that's an interesting surname. Does that put you from another planet or something? Or?
Yeah. I don't like to talk about it too much. It's a little spooky, but no. I think my great-grandparents, or even the generation before, were immigrants to the U.S., and I'm sure it was a longer name that they shortened, so there's not a lot of us around. But...
So probably from Eastern Europe or Germany or something like that. Well, there you go. Well, it's a great name, Nicholas Zork.
Thanks.
Good to have a name with a Z in it, I reckon.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. I don't mind having an odd name.
So Nicholas, you're working in New York, helping out an Adventist church there in the area of worship. I mean, most churches manage to organise, worship sort of, themselves without paying someone. What extra value do you add to the worship experience at that church in Manhattan?
Well, that's a good question. So, sometimes I wonder what extra value I add because we have so many great folks in the church, and they were sort of very successfully, leading the worship ministry before I got there. But one of the things that we do is we just try to make the worship service a space and time, a community gathering where people can connect with one another, where people have the opportunity to connect possibly with God. For us, that's our our primary time when we're all gathered together as a church community, and it's one of the primary times when our doors are open and we welcome everyone. So for us, really, it's an opportunity to meet one another and to meet God. There's a great line I read in a book. It said that worship is not about meaning so much as it is about meeting. Meeting one another, meeting God.
Okay, not about meaning so much as meeting. Wow.
Yeah, there's plenty of meaning too, but we get so, I think, focused sometimes on meaning, about what we're saying, what we're trying to say, that we forget to really meet one another in the diversity that we are, and learn from one another. And that in that openness to one another, I think we can be open to God and to learning from God as well. So
now, often, Nick, when we talk about worship, we use it as a synonym for music. You know, we say, oh, the worship leader this week is such and such. By that we mean this person is leading out in a couple of songs. But the definition of worship is much bigger, isn't it?
Yeah, I think ultimately worship is an embodied attitude. You know, all the words for worship in the Bible are, they are things that we do, kneeling, bowing. They're things that we do with our bodies that connote a certain attitude. And I think when we do that together, it's we're embodying an attitude of recognizing God's worth, also an attitude of openness.
Yeah, because worship comes from the word worth, doesn't it?
Yeah, so ascribing worth is part of it. But I also think that, you know, that comes really from worthship, the Old English word. But the main Hebrew word is a word that really just means to lie down prostrate. Now, we don't do that a lot in my church. That's done in some churches. But I think it's that kind of embodied attitude of humility, of honoring God, of humble service.
So it's all different ways to say, God, you are worthy. God, you are to be praised. Is that what worship is about? Essentially, different ways of communicating that to God?
Yeah,
or am I oversimplifying?
No, I think it is that. I think it's also it's an entire orientation. It's a different way of being in the world. And when we gather together, we can honoring God, orienting ourselves toward God. God, the one who's holy, the one who is the ultimate other. I think that also changes the way that we live toward all the others around us. So I think worship is really a way of life. It's a different way of being in the world as a community in which we're orientated not toward ourselves, but toward God. And in being oriented toward God, we're also oriented toward God's priorities, which is everyone in this world.
Okay, so Nick, you've come halfway around the world to Australia for the Manifest Festival to talk about worship. So, I mean, you know, most of us who go to church, you know, most weeks know or think we know what worship looks like. What are you offering here in Australia, or how are you challenging people at that Manifest Festival to think about worship differently, to practice worship differently? Like, what are you bringing to the table?
Well, you know, I think oftentimes we think in terms of worship as being a presentation. We think from the perspective of those of us who are up front anyway, and who are planning, think of worship from the perspective of the platform.
A performance, essentially.
Right, yeah. Exactly. And I really want to encourage folks, and I try to encourage myself and our team back in New York, to think from the perspective of the pew, to think from the perspective of the one who's gathered, because really it is a participatory event, first and foremost. And it's a participatory event in which we're becoming immersed in a story that's bigger than all of us, but a story that also involves all of us. So it's a worship really is, I think, this time where we are weaving sort of all of our human stories as individuals, as a community, as a world, into a divine story of redemption through Christ. And it's in that kind of that interweaving, that entering into that narrative, that I think we can find hope and healing. It can bring people coming from different places together as we recognize that we're all part of one story. So I think, but if we don't think about how we are participating and how we're facilitating participation, it can just be a presentation.
Well, give me some practical examples, Nicholas. I mean, okay, because what you're saying sounds good sort of in theory, but what does participatory worship actually look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would just, as a musician, I would break it down even sometimes to very specific aesthetic things. You know, there are ways that I sing if I'm just giving a concert. And I sing, you know, in churches, but, you know, most of the time, actually, I sing in music venues and theaters and things outside of church. And if I'm singing and people are meant to listen, I sing in a certain way. I sing in keys that are good for my voice. I play in ways that might be, well, I'm hoping that they're interesting to listen to, maybe surprising rhythms. Maybe,
rather than easy to sing along with.
Right, maybe it's unpredictable in some way. I think if participation is the goal, it's just a different set of aesthetic values. You know, we try to choose songs and keys that everyone can sing. We try to sing a version of a song that is rhythmically predictable. Yeah, there's still surprises, but we don't want to lose folks.
Yeah, that's music, but we've just been talking about how worship is much larger than music. How do we make other aspects of the church service more participatory? The prayer, what else?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is something. First of all, I'll tell you what we don't do at our church every week. We don't change the order of service drastically every week.
Okay.
Because that makes for a very interesting program. But if every week everything's all mixed up, it becomes very difficult to participate. And we like to involve a lot of different folks in leading out, in praying, in reading scriptures.
So there's a predictability to it.
Yeah, there's sort of a rhythm that people have learned so that they can easily jump in and tell a story, jump in and read a scripture, jump in and offer a prayer, because they know where they're at. We're not sort of, if you change everything, it makes it very hard to involve a lot of people. And we like to involve as many people as possible in leading out from up front. But also, we like to create space in the service when actually nothing's happening much on the platform. You know, sometimes we will sing a simple refrain and then just leave a space of silence.
Wow, time to listen.
Yeah, where people can listen, where people can bring their own prayers, where we sort of recognize that the essential thing that happens when we gather isn't what's happening into a microphone. The essential thing that happens is what's happening as a community gathered. In the presence of God.
And what's happening in people's hearts, I guess.
Yeah, and you have to, if we don't create space for that, then the message that we're sending non-verbally is that, in fact, what matters most is what's happening on the platform, what's happening in the mic.
Wow. Oh, it's a real change in perspective. Thanks so much for your time today, Nicholas. And I understand you have a website if people want to follow what you're doing.
Just my name, nicholaszork.com, and I try to post the things I'm doing up there, the music that I do in churches and the music that I do in other community venues. So, yeah.
Great. All right.
It's a good place to find me.
We'll check that out, nicholaszork.com, and we'll see you after the break.
Cyclone Pam destroyed 53 Seventh-day Adventist churches in Vanuatu, and churches are central to village life. I've been in villages where at 6 in the morning they gather for worship before they go out and work. And then after work they come together because community is built around church. So to rebuild churches in Vanuatu will really help community life. So let's give a little to help Vanuatu a lot. Donate at hopechannel.com.
Welcome back. Now, Sibel, that was a really fascinating discussion with Nicholas Zork, all his talk about, worship and music and innovation. How do you feel about innovation in worship?
I think it's really important for different members to bring their gifts to the worship table.
Yeah, well, it's a good discussion. It's certainly worth discussing. And we encourage you to join that discussion by dropping us a note on Facebook or Twitter, or maybe send us an email. The details are right there on your screen.
Thanks so much for your company this week. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.
Bye for now.